The Battle of Gettysburg resulted with roughly 51 to 57,000 soldiers dead, missing, or injured. It was a turning point in the Civil War that saw America progress further. But what if those soldiers who gave their life for their country never progressed any further? What if they stayed on that battlefield for over more than a century? Hello everybody, today we'll be talking about the ghosts of Gettysburg. Before we jump into that, if you're new here, welcome, and if you're returning, it's good to see you again. And just a warning ahead of time, I'm going to be showing pictures from the Battle of Gettysburg. They're going to have some pictures of fallen soldiers in it, so if you're squeamish, just letting you know now. Alright, I'm going to start off by giving a brief rundown of the Battle of Gettysburg. If you'd like to skip forward to the ghosts, it's right here. But without further ado, let's get into it. The Battle of Gettysburg took place on July 1st to July 3rd in 1863. And was fought in and around the town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The battle between the Union and Confederate soldiers would be the bloodiest of the Civil War, with Confederate General Robert E. Lee focused on pushing more into the north, and the first day of battle would look favorable to the Confederates. The initial conflict started in the low ridges to the northwest of the town of Gettysburg, where Robert E. Lee honed in on 2 corps of Union infantry, collapsing the hastily made Union lines. This caused those Union soldiers who survived to retreat south of the town, ending the first day of fighting. While the Union faced casualties on the first day, they couldn't imagine what was to come. On the second day, the Union was able to reform and make a fish hook like defense, which would fend off heavy Confederate assaults. Robert E. Lee would go for a left flank that saw brutal fighting in Little Round Top, the Wheat Field, Devil's Den, and the Peach Orchard, later just becoming a full-out assault all over the place. This included Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill. This fighting would continue all throughout the second day, with the Union holding strong, albeit with significant losses. The third day would continue on to see more fighting, but notably would hold a fatal mistake by the Confederates. This was with Pickett's Charge, where Robert E. Lee ordered roughly 12,000 Confederate soldiers to march across an open field towards Union positions. Now, if you've ever played video games or just know anything about combat, an open field isn't a good idea when the enemies have ranged weapons. And as was the case, the Union immediately sent barrage after barrage of small and heavy armed artillery. And after roughly 30 minutes of the Confederate soldiers having to walk over their fallen comrades, they would manage to breach one section of the Union line. Yet the small victory was in vain, as the Confederates would be stopped there, unable to proceed past the Union. This was Robert E. Lee's last chance at a decisive victory, as his supplies were running out, and he would fail to get that victory, as he had to retreat his army back to Virginia. It is estimated that the Battle of Gettysburg left 23,055 Union soldiers dead, wounded, captured, or missing. The Confederate side is harder to pin down, but the idea ranges from 23 to 28,000 in losses, with nearly a third of Robert E. Lee's general officers dead, totaling it at around 51,000 to 57,000 lost or wounded. And during this time in history, medical care was actually advancing a lot, and they slowed down the use of amputations with dirty knives and stuff, so that's a plus. However, that didn't guarantee a small wound wouldn't become fatal, which is where the battle leads us into ghostly territory. The brutality, the hastily dug graves, and numerous unidentified fallen soldiers are what many point to as the reason for high ghost activity in the remains of the Battle of Gettysburg. Hearing cannons and soldiers to seeing and feeling ghosts have been reported all over the battlefield, so we'll get started with the Devil's Den. On the battlefield of Gettysburg, there would be a mile-wide area full of boulders and rocks that any soldier who came across it would note how horrible the ground was to fight on. This was Devil's Den, where more than 5,000 soldiers would see conflict. Devil's Den would be important to the Union as it was good territory advantage, plus it offered good lines of communication all throughout. However, the Confederates knew this and would be launching heavy assaults all over. This included Devil's Den, even though Major General John Bell Hood, the leader in charge against Devil's Den, would protest, pointing out how big the advantage was for the Union.
They don't even need guns to defend that. All they need to do is roll rocks down on you.
However, he still followed his orders, and after a clash of roughly 3,000 Confederate and 2,000 Union, the Confederates would come out on top. However, bodies would cover the rocks, and the Major General was injured. This assault is what many historians point to as a mistake on Robert E. Lee's side, as while the position was definitely an advantage, they suffered mass amounts of casualties just in this one area. And the amount of casualties they faced in this battle would be decisive for the war. However, for now, the Confederates had Devil's Den, and the rocks were then used for Confederate sharpshooters aiming into Little Round Top, which was then occupied by the Union. Before getting to Little Round Top and in between Devil's Den, there was a little place nicknamed Slaughter's Pen. Now I'm sure that name spells it out pretty well, but bodies on top of bodies would line up in this area. And after the war, many bodies just laid out there for weeks, which is how we got these famous pictures. Some of them have been reenacted by people who were there for the aftermath. So just bodies, ridden everywhere. With all these dead soldiers in this specific area with such ruthless fighting, many people believe that their spirits haven't been able to leave. When looking at the rocks that lay in Devil's Den, many tourists have reported seeing apparitions or dim specter soldiers climbing through the rocks. Some hunters would actually come across a friendly ghost in this area. These hunters who had gotten lost would report what looked like a wounded soldier pointing the way back to civilization. When they turned around to thank the man, he wasn't there. And for those skeptical like me, there's actually been some footage filmed of some of the weird activity going on. Many people have reported hearing screams, gunshots, and cannon fire. while other reports go as to seeing soldiers doing their duties, like loading weapons, aiding their wounds, or even getting a cannon ready. Famously, there have been 3 recordings that have picked up supposed footage of ghostly soldiers from the Battle of Gettysburg. And hearing sounds of the battle that happened so long ago isn't the only thing reported. There have been constant sightings of ghostly regiments walking by in the fields, just like they did back in 1863. Other visitors and ghost hunters have reported seeing regiments marching in formation, as well as reports of hearing the sounds of drums. A consequence of the Battle of Gettysburg and the Civil War that not many people think about is the fact that many children's fathers and mothers were killed during the battle, and many surviving mothers couldn't take care of the children without their fathers. This led to roughly 20,000 children becoming orphans after the Civil War. One of these orphanages in Gettysburg would expose these children to even more brutality. The National Soldiers' Orphan Homestead was originally a private home, then became a makeshift hospital for the Battle of Gettysburg, and then finally becoming a home for the children who had lost their parents in the battle. And at the beginning, things went great. The children were educated, well-fed, and clothed. However, that would change with a new headmistress, Rosa Carmichael, sometime in the early 1870s, with abusive tendencies becoming more and more frequent, as there was no one to watch Rosa Carmichael and what she was doing to the children. She would lock children in the outhouse, chain them up, tie them outside on hot summer days, as well as reportedly recruiting a teenage boy, known only as Stick Boy, to dish out her punishment, using, you guessed it, a stick. And while there were rumors of child negligence, in 1873, it wouldn't be until 1876, when no child from the orphanage attended a Memorial Day procession, then people began to thoroughly investigate the house, finding the children.
Orphans?
Who had been hidden before in all previous inspections. Even though I feel like if you're inspecting an orphanage, you should be looking for some kids, but whatever.
Can you shut the fuck up?
Rosa Carmichael would be convicted of charges of cruelty in 1876 and would be told to leave town and pay a $20 fine. But in some reports I've read, she actually stayed in Gettysburg for a little bit longer and then left. So pretty much no punishment for abusing children. Oh, and also, some of the children went missing and were never found. So I'm sure you can imagine what she might have done, especially with the Battle of Gettysburg and all those hastily dug graves. And even worse, the orphanage wouldn't survive because of her. It had the fundings and once a good reputation, but all the bad publicity made it shut down, because apparently the kids didn't matter.
Fuck the kids?
The building was later turned into the National Soldiers Museum, which has since closed, but when it was open, apparently workers and visitors would report weird encounters. Some ghost hunters have said that they seen Stick Boy, and they describe him as an angry teenage boy in a checkered shirt with a stick, slapping against his palm. Bitch. As well as reported physical pain when workers tried to talk about Rosa Carmichael, with other reports including things being pushed off shelves, toys being played with, and even a group of tourists being locked in the basement.
I turned the knob and the door wouldn't open. The tension in the room built. I tried to call to the other guide in the building, but he couldn't hear me at all.
The Jenny Wade House is the location where the only civilian casualty of the Battle of Gettysburg would take place. The unfortunate victim of war was Mary Virginia Wade, or Jenny Wade. Jenny Wade and her family believed that her sister's home would be farther away from the upcoming conflict, so they traveled there. Unluckily, however, it was in the direct path of Union soldiers retreating from Confederate soldiers. And while the family could have run or hidden, they decided to help out the Union soldiers, with Jenny Wade baking bread for the soldiers. A building far across from the home would be known as Farnsworth House Inn, which was a higher building, perfect for the Confederate sharpshooters who occupied it, and they were targeting the Union soldiers who were running, as well as soldiers inside the house. A stray bullet would hit Jenny Wade while she was working in her sister's kitchen. The bullet would enter her back and through her heart, and she would die instantly. The Union soldiers and Jenny's family then retreated to the basement, which must have just been dreadful. Not only do you have to look at your dead loved one, but the Confederate soldiers didn't stop their attacks, so they're still coming. But luckily they would all make it out okay. Well, as okay as the circumstances allow for. A local legend inquires that Jenny Wade was engaged to a soldier, Jack Skelly, a childhood friend. Skelly would be wounded and supposedly give a note to another friend of his and Jenny's, Wesley Culp. Jack Skelly would later die, and Wesley Culp would make it back to Gettysburg. Unfortunately, he would die in battle, in his home that he grew up in, never being able to deliver the note to Jenny. Today, a flag flies 24/7 on Jenny Wade's grave, an honor bestowed to women only to her and Betsy Ross. The Jenny Wade House has spawned many ghostly encounters. Visitors, workers, and paranormal investigators would report glimpses of shadows running by, hearing voices asking about other people, and an overall feeling of anxiety anxiety and dread when in that basement Jenny and her family were held up in. People usually point towards the brutalness as well as the suddenness of Jenny Wade's death, as well as the unlucky circumstances regarding the note of Jack Skelly, for the reason of so much ghost activity. The Battle of Gettysburg encapsulated the whole town, and the bloodiest battle of the Civil War would get that name for a good reason. With so many nearby buildings becoming makeshift hospitals, and others forced to adapt to the circumstances of war, with mass amounts of soldiers who had never been identified, and plenty more of shallow graves. The idea of people who have perished in such a brutal time and still stuck there is haunting. And that's just one of the reasons I and many others love the history and mystery of the Battle of Gettysburg. And I hope you enjoyed listening to me babble about it. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, a like is appreciated. And if you're interested in the weirder side of history, you might want to subscribe. Alright, bye.